What comes to mind when you think about the concept of masculinity? Traditionally, masculinity has been painted with broad, bold strokes. It's been defined by attributes such as physical strength, dominance, and a seemingly unshakable emotional stoicism. It's the image of the unyielding, infallible hero, the man who stands tall against adversity and never shows a hint of vulnerability. But, in this day and age, we've begun to understand that this is an impossibly rigid model to live up to. A model that, in fact, can be harmful and damaging. It sets up expectations that many men feel they must meet or risk being perceived as less than a real man. These expectations can lead to a pressure cooker situation where men feel they must suppress their emotions, always be in control, and never show weakness. This is not to say that strength and stoicism are inherently negative traits. On the contrary, they can be incredibly valuable in certain situations. But they become problematic when they are seen as the only acceptable way for men to behave, denying the reality that men, like all human beings, are complex and multifaceted. Society's traditional ideas of masculinity also often include an element of dominance or control. Men are often expected to be the alpha, the leader, the one in charge. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong with being a leader. The problem arises when this expectation turns into a demand for control, often at the expense of others. This is where the concept of toxic masculinity comes into play. It's the idea that some of the traits traditionally associated with masculinity can become harmful or toxic when they are taken to an extreme. It's the belief that men must always be strong, always be in control, and never show emotions. But it's important to remember that not all masculinity is toxic. There is a distinction to be made between toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity. The latter involves respect, empathy, and self-awareness. These expectations and stereotypes, when taken to an extreme, brew the unhealthy version of masculinity known as toxic masculinity. So, what does bad toxic masculinity look like in real life? Imagine a man who always feels the need to assert dominance, who believes that any show of emotion is a sign of weakness. This man, unfortunately, is a prime example of bad toxic masculinity. He might be the guy at the bar who insists on picking fights, or the office bully who uses intimidation to exert control. Bad toxic masculinity promotes aggression, encouraging men to solve problems with their fists instead of their words. This not only leads to physical harm, but it also perpetuates a culture of violence that affects everyone around them. Men caught in this cycle find themselves in a constant state of conflict, and women, unfortunately, often bear the brunt of this aggression. But the harm isn't just external. Bad toxic masculinity teaches men to stifle their emotions, to bottle up their feelings, and put on a show of stoic indifference. This emotional repression can lead to serious mental health issues, including depression and anxiety. Men learn to isolate themselves, believing that they must face their struggles alone. This can lead to a deep sense of loneliness and a damaged self-esteem. Bad toxic masculinity is also damaging to relationships. It fosters disrespect, with men believing that they must always be in control, that their needs and desires should always come first. This can lead to abusive relationships, where one party feels entitled to control the other. It's not just men who suffer. Women too are affected by bad toxic masculinity. They can feel devalued, disrespected, and threatened. They may even internalize these harmful messages, believing that they must accept this behavior as the norm. Let's be clear, this form of masculinity is not a representation of all men. There are many men who reject these harmful norms and strive to be respectful, empathetic, and self-aware. It's clear that bad toxic masculinity is a destructive force, but not all masculinity is toxic. In the next scene, we'll explore the concept of good toxic masculinity, which highlights the positive traits that men can embody. On the other side of the coin, we have what we call good toxic masculinity. What does that look like? Well, let's dive into that, shall we? Good toxic masculinity is a term we use to describe men who embody traits like respect, empathy, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness. These traits, though sometimes considered soft or feminine, are in fact fundamental to being a well-rounded individual. So what do these traits look like in action? Consider the case of a man who's just lost a game of football. Instead of responding with aggression or defensiveness, he shakes hands with his opponents, congratulates them on their win, and reflects on ways he could improve. This is respect and self-awareness in action. He acknowledges his emotions, but doesn't let them dictate his actions. Then there's empathy, a trait often misconstrued as a weakness. Picture a man comforting a friend who's grieving. While he might not have experienced the same loss, he's there, offering a shoulder to cry on, lending an ear to listen. He's not trying to fix the situation, but merely to understand and offer support. This is empathy. And emotional intelligence? That's a man who recognizes his feelings and is able to express them in a healthy and constructive way. He's the one who says, "I'm feeling frustrated about this situation," rather than lashing out or bottling up his feelings. These traits of good toxic masculinity lead to healthier relationships, both with oneself and others. Men who embody these traits are more likely to have strong positive relationships with their partners, friends, and colleagues. They're also less likely to struggle with mental health issues, as they're better equipped to handle emotional stress and conflict. But the benefits of good toxic masculinity extend beyond the individual. When men embody respect, empathy, and emotional intelligence, they foster a healthier, more understanding society. They challenge harmful gender norms and create a safer, more inclusive world for everyone. As we can see, good toxic masculinity is about being a better human being, not just a better man. So, we've explored the contrasting faces of masculinity. What are the key takeaways? In this journey, we've dissected the multifaceted entity that is masculinity, highlighting the stark contrast between good and bad toxic masculinity. Bad toxic masculinity, marked by aggression, disrespect, and a lack of appreciation, can have damaging effects on both men and women, fostering a culture of fear and dominance. On the flip side, good toxic masculinity is shown in the form of respect, composure, and sharpness. It is a positive force, encouraging men to be empathetic, self-aware, and respectful, leading to healthier relationships and a more balanced society. The challenge lies in breaking away from traditional stereotypes of masculinity and embracing these positive traits. It's about shifting our understanding and redefining what it means to be a man in today's world. Remember, masculinity is not about dominance or aggression, it's about respect, empathy, and self-awareness. Let's redefine masculinity together.